You have you come
And
to
if I didn't ask questions,
to a conclusion.
You know how much I stand up for Messianics, for things that get me thrown under the bus daily by Orthodox Jews. What am I going to deny just because most Jews disagree with it? It's there or it's not there, okay? But if something's not there, I won't say it's there. I'm honest. I am completely intellectually honest. Trust me, my life would be so much easier if I became a Messianic or a Hebrew rotor or a Muslim than remain in a religion where the people hate me. You know, it's 100%. It's because I'm in a search for truth that I put up with what I put up with, because I feel that truth is such a value to me that I'll do anything to stand up for what's right. Come on, guys. You know, next question.
I got one for you. It's kind of going to piggyback off this because the chat.
Oh, no.
Do you think that Judaism has a, I don't know how to say this, like being condemned, I guess, to a point of, I guess, to hell, to wherever, or lacking a share in the world to come, like Christianity does? Because I think it does. I think, in other words, what I'm asking you is, if someone were to say, because I get this question a lot, do you think because I don't believe in Jesus, I'm condemned? My answer is frank. Yes. Why? Because you are rejecting the salvation of Hashem. So likewise, and I say the same thing, Judaism also has the belief that if you don't believe blank, 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 you're not going to have a share in the world to come, or you're not going to. Okay.
No, I agree 100%.
So it's not just a messianic thing. Like if you don't.
It's not just a messianic thing. I constantly say that counter-missionary rabbis, when they're trying to make a point, they'll suddenly become Karaite and disregard everything that Judaism has to say on a topic just to make a point. But there's a whole section in the Gemara called Perek Chelek that deals with Chelek, like once Chelek in Olam Haba, his portion in the world to come. And it says, if you don't believe in this, you don't believe in that. And this is mainly where the Rambam built his 13 principles of. And he says that if you don't believe in this, you don't have a share in the world to come. So Christians didn't invent this. But of course, the Torah doesn't have enough to say about it. So it's really just conjecture, just because the opinions of rabbis never really carried too much weight in Judaism regarding metaphysical issues. Now, sometimes a lot of those metaphysical issues crept into halakha. And I think that was the biggest issue that the Sadducees had with the Pharisees, not in creating rabbinic law, because even the Talmud talks about the Sanhedrin being made up of Sadducees and them instituting laws, but where those laws came from, what drove them to institute laws. For example, we have this halakha to rejoice on the Sabbath of Oneg Shabbat. But the rabbis use Isaiah 55, that where it says that one should rejoice on the Sabbath, and elevated that to a command, i.e. a rabbinic command, and it's incumbent on every Jew now to try to rejoice on the Sabbath. Right? So it seems that that's where the Sadducees wanted laws to come from Scripture itself, that whether it's in the prophets or the writings or the heck, I mean, for sure the Torah itself. But what they were against was laws coming from what was called the tradition of the fathers. So traditions of the fathers are what we call midrashim and agadot nowadays. Basically, these stories that have nothing to do with the text. Like here's where the notion of resurrection of the dead literally came from, because it doesn't really resemble what appears in Ezekiel chapter 37 or Daniel chapter 12. And this is really where the notion of the Messiah came from the traditions of our fathers, not from literally, literal statements made by prophets and biblical heroes.
There was a Facebook or a YouTube question. They wanted to know why you shaved off your payot.
So I lived in Israel for about 5 years. I lived in a settlement in a beautiful place called Kohav Shachar. And where I lived, I actually made Aliyah with peyot. That was initially where I was in my life. I was new to Judaism. I felt that, but like most people, why do people have long beards in Judaism, in Orthodox Judaism, right? Because Orthodox Jews, believing in the oral law, don't believe that one has to have a long beard. They just believe that you just can't shave it with a razor. Now, why do they wear a long beard? Why do they wear a black hat or a coat when all that is unnecessary? I mean, ask your rabbi next time when you see him with a long, itchy beard, why does he choose to wear that beard? Because people tend to take you more seriously. It's really a tactic. They probably won't use those words, but all these cranial accessories are all tactics to get you to take people more seriously. The Torah doesn't command it. So where I lived at the time was a place, if you know settlers in Israel, everyone has these knit kippot and long peyot, and that's just the garb. So after I moved to America, I kept it for around 2 years more, and then I just shaved it off. That's it. Guys, if I try to be anything, is honest. Okay, like I have no axe to grind.
I have a question. You talk about the Rambam, essentially putting bringing what the court has ruled, right? So you learn the Chumash and then you learn the Rambam, and you sort of you need to do what you need to do. But how do we decipher what in the Mishnah Torah is his opinion versus what is from the court?
That's
there's
a good question.
There's a lot in there, right? And so, do we take
sure.
everything, or?
Now, this is a serious question. So the question is, first, what is from the court? Where does it appear? Does it appear in the Gemara, or does it just appear in the Mishnah? The Sefra, the Sefri, the Mechilta, the Toseftot, the Braitot. So it's not in the Gemara. The Rambam includes many rulings, even from the Geonim, and he doesn't tell you it's from the Geonim. As a matter of fact, if you look in Hilchot Deot, he tells you dietary laws, right? Him being a doctor, he says, well, don't eat too much fruit because it's unhealthy for you. Now, the Rambam could just be giving you medical advice there, but it still appears as halacha aleph or halacha beis. He's not making a distinction. But how about when he brings down midrashim, that 6 laws were given to Adam Arishon and the last law was given to Noach in terms of the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach? He's bringing a medrash, but it still appears like halacha 1, halacha 2. So the reason I mentioned the Rambam is because that's really the best place to start. And really, like if one masters Mishneh Torah, he's going to know more than 90% of the rabbis out there, 99% of the rabbis, no doubt. Okay, being that the vast majority of rabbis don't even study halakha anymore, they're like studying the Ramchal, and they're just not living up to the title rabbi, which just means, someone who gives over halakha. So how do you know? Well, sometimes the Rambam says it himself. Sometimes it says, he says it seems to me, but he doesn't always say it. And this is why when someone asks me a serious question about a topic of halakha, I'll first go to the Rambam, and then I'll accompany it with Kesef Mishnah or Lechem Mishnah, which pretty much tells you where the Rambam got his ruling from. And if I see that the ruling doesn't appear straight from the Mishnah, like for example, I just came out with a video this Purim about getting drunk on Purim, about the whole story of Rav Zera and Rabba. About 8 years ago, I came out with a video bringing down the Rambam's position on how, yes, like drunkenness is prohibited, but halachic parameters of drunkenness is drinking more of a revius, which is really like 3 ounces. He was taking the medrash, the Agadah of Rav Zera and Rava seriously as that this was authoritative and halachic, but they don't know that that story doesn't appear in the Mishnah, that it's reiterated like a medrash by the Amoraim, which means that it carries no weight halachically. The court wouldn't lash you for not drinking because people didn't get drunk at that time. As a matter of fact, Rav Zera, even though Rav Zera is an interesting character because he's one of the few Amoraim who actually got smicha. He became from Rav Zera, he became Rabbi Zera. He's one of the few exceptions, but he existed when there was no Sanhedrin. People still had smicha towards the end, even though there was no Sanhedrin. But regardless, the Amoraim don't have the authority to institute binding law. So even though the Rambam breaks it down as some obligation that one should drink a little bit like a revius, take a nap, and like that, not be able to tell the difference between cursed is Mordechai and blessed is Chaim or vice versa, that one should know better and say that's not a halakha. It's not, and it's worse if you go through Shulchan Aruch because he's throwing everything in there. The Ramah is even worse, and Mishnah Berurah is even worse. No one makes a distinction between the words of Chazal, and even the Rambam will tell you in the first parak of Hilchos Mamrim what is the oral law, and he ties it to the Beis Din Agadol. Beis Din Agadol Sheber Yerushalayim Chem Iker Torah Shebal Peh. That it's the court in Jerusalem in the Lishkat HaGazit that they're the Iker, the source of Torah Shebal Peh, not Amoraim. All this stuff you need a rabbi to teach you, but no one teaches this anymore. So as much as I've gained, and what the heck do I know? I'm able to give it over to you guys, and then you guys could one day surpass anything I may know on the topic and get people to a clear understanding of Jewish law, which doesn't exist nowadays. When you have rabbis saying that even the teachers of the rabbis were also given on Mount Sinai, it means that we're lost, okay? And we don't know what the heck's going on. But I think this is why I come out successful in my discussions, because these rabbis know that what I'm saying is true, but they don't know how to articulate it because they've only heard bits and pieces of it. And then when I put it together, and I didn't really make all this up by myself also, when I was in yeshiva in Israel, I mean, really, I learned the bulk of what I learned on my own. And I went to Isha Torah and I went to Or Sameach and all these other Baal Tshuva yeshivas. But it wasn't till I started learning with Timanim and people that most people don't learn with in Israel that now, heck, I think that Rabbi David Bar Chaim is a big asset for people who have even spent their whole life in yeshiva because they're just taught one thing over and over again. But it's not the rabbi's fault because they don't know either. A lot of the stuff has been lost because it's really a big gaggle of the way Judaism is taught nowadays. There's no systematic theology where no one can tell you what's binding, what's not binding. It's not just who said it, when was it said, right? Because some rabbis outweigh another rabbi, right? I mean, for sure, like in the case of our Amoraim versus Tanaim. And you could go earlier with Zugot, and then other books like the Sefra, the Sefri, the Mechutza, which is Midrashei Halacha. What weight does that carry? No one asks these questions. Like, what's rabbinic? What's from the Torah? What's Halacha? What's a Minag? Everything is lumped in together into oral law. And why do you put a shoe on first and the other? Oh, well, that's oral law. And like, if you don't believe in that, you're denying all of Torah. It's not even a custom. It's Kabbalah. People not being able to make a distinction between things is why we have Judaism in such a dumbified state. And I hope that answers your question. Yeah.
I got one for you.
Coño, you guys don't get tired, huh?
No, well, hey, you said to be
so you guys should be out there writing like any responsible individual.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So, deep in the Amazon, no one has heard of Hashem. Can they be saved? What's up?
This notion of saved doesn't appear in the Torah.
This is the comment section. Okay, I'm having.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
So salvation in Torah is redemption, redeemed. It means being saved from something on earth, or at least that's the example that it appears in the Torah: being saved from bondship, being saved from surrounding nations. That's what salvation is. Now, it may mean something else in other places. I'm just saying, according to the Torah, that's what being saved is for. Now, there are instances that he writes you in some book. For what? There must be some metaphysical weight there that I'm not able to grasp because it's not literal enough. It says that Abraham, it says that he died, he was gathered to his fathers, then he was buried. It seems that there's something more. It's not enough for me to condemn someone for not believing. It's just not there. I think.
But is it?
All right. So being that God did judge people before the Torah was given, it means that God does judge people on actions alone, at least assuming that there isn't an authoritative text of his will, that God would take your actions into account and weigh them. Why? Because everyone is born with a basic sense of morality. This is what people have to understand, that only because God doesn't tell you it's wrong to murder, that it makes it okay because God didn't say it. No, this is really where the notion of the 7 laws of Noah came from. An attempt to say that God holds people who don't know any better to some ethical standard. That whether it's 7 laws, whether it's 20 laws, whether it's 100 laws, there's a basic sense of morality that everyone is born with. And this is the only way God could really reward you for choosing the right path. Because then you could say, God, the only reason I didn't choose the right path or even make a search for it was because I didn't grow up in an Orthodox neighborhood. I didn't grow up with Orthodox parents. And this is why that person's religious, because he was forced to be. Right? Or he was indoctrinated to be. No, everyone has a bare minimum, born with a bare minimum, knowing what's right and wrong. Now, it's not enough to get you declared completely ethical, but it's enough to at least get you to a proper belief system that's going to push you the rest of the way. This is why if someone has never heard of Torah or of Tanakh or the God of Israel, and he still knows enough to fight against his own nature. This is why Abraham is elevated in our belief system, because he knew nothing and he came to this notion of ethical monotheism on his own, and God elevated him to be the father of many nations. So I think God's going to elevate others who happen to have no other excuse to be ethical other than that they haven't blunted their moral compass that I believe everyone is instilled with. That's it.
So basically Romans 2. Just say.
All right. No problem.
I'm catching flack in the chat. That's the reason why I brought it up, because of what I said. And I was like, well, let me just ask the question.
No, I don't think anyone, even a Christian, would a Christian say that someone who hasn't accepted Jesus, who lives on some deserted island, that God is going to cast them into hell. Perhaps I know Catholics teaches that if a child is not baptized, he goes to limbo or something. Like God's going to punish you for something that you had no choice in the matter. And it kind of sounds like a barbaric God.
Yeah, I think all people are born inherently, because we're created in the image of God, with a certain, like you said, murder.
A basic sense of morality, just a basic sense. This is why God could punish Sodom and Gomorrah before there was a standard to adhere to. Now, of course, some people say, "Oh, well, this shows that they had the Torah and they rejected it." It doesn't mean that. Did Cain have the Torah too? No, there's a basic sense of morality. Clearly, so we really can't plead ignorance on everything, because we're not.
Yeah, and even more, it really talks about I think a lot of people, especially Christians, think that Sodom and Gomorrah's sin was homosexuality, but really its sin was, not having mercy for the people and the widow. And
I know that's what Ezekiel says, but Ezekiel is much later. I mean, it could have been not homosexuality. I mean, for sure, but the text didn't even say that. It means rape. But they were going to forcibly. It wasn't.
Right, it was like the angel.
It's not like they walked into a gay bar, and then people were being respectful. I mean, this is sex that was not consensual. So I think that's what the literal understanding is, where they were forcing themselves on people.
Gang rape, like that movie with Jodie Foster years ago, where she portrayed a real actual event where these drunks in a bar raped this woman, and when it went to court, the guys actually got off because of the clothes she was wearing and such, even though it was a gang rape.
Oh, I remember that movie. That was her first movie.
Jodie Foster. Gang rape is unacceptable in any culture.
Right.
It shouldn't be acceptable in any culture, but
right.
I think what you just said there, Rabbi, as well. I think you're giving legs to atheism to say that people are instilled with a sense of morality.
Basic sense. No, a basic sense. How can God reward anyone for choosing the right path if he told you initially that what was completely right and wrong? That means that you knew nothing was right and nothing was wrong till God told you. Then how can he reward you for choosing him in the first place? If you weren't struggling against some nature. I mean, Jake says that this does fuel an atheist argument. If one could be completely ethical, or as ethical as a religious person, not believing in God and not knowing of God, because a lot of these atheists nowadays claim to be ethical, but they grew up religious or in some society that had biblical values. Like, if one could be as religious, then why do you need religion?